Preface. In the earliest whispers of our world, when the earth was still young and the air thick with the hum of life, there was a time when we did not yet know the meaning of stillness. We were wanderers, driven by the rhythms of nature and the pulse of the seasons. We lived among the wild things, breathing with the wind, moving with the herds, chasing the sun as it traced its path across the sky. But there came a time, not long ago, when everything changed. The winds brought us to a bend in the river, and in that place, the world began to shift. No longer did we need to roam, for we had found a home, a place where the land spoke in whispers, where the river sang to us, and where the sky stretched wide with promises of peace. This is the story of those first years of stillness, when we learned to stay. It is a story of connection, of the land beneath our feet, the water that nourished us, the stone we shaped with our hands, and the animals that walked beside us. It is a story of tenderness, of finding our place in the fabric of life, and of discovering that home is not just a place, but a way of being. In the quiet moments, we listened. And in listening, we began to understand. This is our story, of how we came to belong. Where the river stays, life in the Middle Stone Age. Chapter 1, The Quiet Earth Beneath Our Feet. I remember the feeling of stillness most of all. It came quietly, like the hush that falls over the land just after dusk, when the wind grows soft and even the trees seem to breathe slower. We had wandered for many seasons, my people and I, always moving, always chasing the herds, always guided by the shifting rhythms of the sun and the moon. But then we found the bend in the river, and everything changed. The river spoke in a constant murmur, its voice weaving through the tall reeds and over the polished stones like an old lullaby. It was wide here, deep and generous, its banks dressed in soft moss and tangled roots. Fish shimmered like silver thoughts just below the surface, and birds in brilliant plumage darted between the branches above. For the first time, we did not need to leave. We had found enough. We built our first shelters from the bones of fallen trees and the skins of animals that had once walked beside us. They were not like the brush lean-tos we made when we roamed. These were sturdier, heavier in their quiet promise. I remember pressing my hands into the packed earth of the floor, feeling its coolness, its patience. It welcomed us without question. At night, the firelight danced on the walls, throwing long shadows that flickered like memories. We told stories then, old ones of the chase, of the long winters and the endless steppe, but now, new stories joined them. Of planting wild seeds in the loam near the water. Of learning which roots would soothe an aching belly. Of watching our children play in the same place each morning, their feet wearing small paths in the soil. There was something tender in staying. I began to learn the song of this place, to know the moods of the river, the scent of the wind before a storm. We shaped the land gently, as though afraid to wake it from its ancient sleep. We laid stones in circles for cooking, stacked wood with care, marked the seasons by the rising of the moon over the same line of trees. Time, which once had galloped beside us like a hunted beast, now walked. The elders, who had once led us with eyes on the horizon, now watched the children with eyes full of stillness. They spoke more of listening, less of going. And I, who had once carried everything I owned on my back, found myself growing roots too, within the comfort of rhythm, of familiarity, of names for places and names for days. I remember sitting beside the river one morning, my hands wet with the clay I had scooped from the bank. I was shaping a vessel, slow and clumsy, but real. It would hold water, I thought. Or grain. Or berries gathered under the soft sun. It would hold a piece of this new life. Above me, the sky stretched wide and pale blue, a bowl tipped gently over the earth. The air smelled of damp leaves and smoke and something sweet I couldn't name. A dragonfly hovered near my shoulder, its wings a blur of light. I smiled at it, and it did not flee. We were both staying, after all. And so, the days passed. We no longer chased the world. We let it unfold around us like a blanket slowly pulled over tired limbs. Our hearts, once tuned to the thrum of constant movement, began to sync with the whisper of the river and the hush of evening birds returning to the same nests, again and again. This was not just a place we found. It was a way of being. Of knowing that home did not have to be distant or fleeting. It could be here, beneath our feet. In the taste of spring water cupped in our palms. In the warmth of shared meals and the gentle creak of a roof above our heads. In the way the stars returned each night, just where we left them. Chapter 2, The Song of Stone. It began with a sound, a clean, bright click as flint struck flint, ringing out across the morning like birdsong. That sharp, delicate note marked the beginning of something quiet and profound, the shaping of the world by our own hands. We had always used stone, of course. Long before we stayed in one place, we had flaked rough edges to split meat and scrape hide. But now, with time no longer pressing at our backs, we looked more closely at the stones. We listened to them. We learned their language. The river was our teacher. Along its banks, I found stones smooth from the water's embrace, others with fine veins that split clean under pressure. I knelt often in the silt, choosing with care, letting my fingers run across each surface, feeling for that special kind of silence that meant the stone was waiting to be transformed. My favorite was flint, dark, glassy, and strong. It held a shimmer in the sunlight, as if it remembered fire. I learned to strike it at angles that sent bright slivers flying, fine as slivers of moonlight. At first, I made only simple points and scrapers. But soon, my hands began to remember what my mind could not yet name. The shapes became smaller, more exact, microliths, though we did not have that word. Tiny blades, like teeth, like whispers, sharper than thorn or claw. We pressed them into handles made from bone or antler, wrapping the joins with gut or sinew, sealing them with resin drawn from the trees. These new tools were more than objects. They were extensions of ourselves. A blade fitted to the curve of my grip. A fishing harpoon with barbs sharp enough to hold against a struggling catch. A sewing awl so fine it passed through hide like a needle through soft cloth. There was beauty in their making. Not just in their use, but in the act of creation itself. I would sit beside the fire with others, our knees dusted with flakes, the smell of crushed stone in the air, like a dry kind of rain. We worked quietly, the rhythmic tap and scrape like a kind of music. Each stroke was a conversation with the material. Will you give way? Are you strong enough? What shape do you want to become? I made a knife once for my daughter, carved a pattern into its handle so she would know it was hers. She held it with both hands, eyes wide, as if it were a thing made of magic. And in a way, it was. For this tool, this sliver of sharpened stone, meant we could dress hides faster, cut meat cleaner, carve wood with more precision. It meant she could help shape the world too. As the seasons passed, our tools became many. Curved hooks for fishing, polished axes for felling trees, drills and borons for delicate work. Each had a purpose, a place in the rhythm of our days. We no longer waited on the land to provide what we needed. We learned to coax it gently, to meet it halfway. Sometimes, I would take the scraps of stone left behind, those bits too small for blades, and arrange them in spirals or rows in the dirt, just to see the pattern. Just to honor the idea that even a shard might still hold meaning. A friend once asked why I did this. I told him the stones had stories, and it seemed wrong to scatter them without listening. There is a quiet pride in making things with your hands. In knowing that the sharp edge of a spear, the smooth bowl of a carving, or the glint of a shaped flake came from your own labor. It reminded us that we were not only part of the earth, but also its artists. And when I looked around, at the blades strapped to belts, the traps set with careful skill, the rows of tools hung on the walls of our homes, I felt a hush of awe. Not for the objects alone, but for what they represented. The patience. The knowledge passed from hand to hand. The care embedded in every curve and notch. Stone had once been just stone. But now it was memory. Intention. Wisdom. In the quiet of evening, When the sun slipped behind the trees and the fire painted our shelters with amber light, I would hold a blade in my hand and feel its cool weight, its perfect form. And I would think, this is how we grow, not by leaving everything behind, but by shaping what we find, with love, into something more. Chapter 3, The Water That Feeds. The river never stopped speaking. Even in the stillest part of night, when the wind held its breath and the world curled into silence, I could hear it, murmuring just beyond the edge of sleep. A constant, gentle voice that called us closer, not with words, but with promises. Of life. Of sustenance. Of rhythm. It was the water that held us here. Long after the novelty of unmoving ground became comfort, and the scent of home became known to us, it was the river that remained our companion. It provided not only drink, but something deeper, an offering of nourishment that shimmered just beneath its surface. We learned to read it, this winding silver thread through the land. In the way the reeds moved, we could sense where the fish gathered. In the swirls of silt, we could guess the river's moods, when it was calm and when it would rise. It became a partner in our living, not something we tamed, but something we listened to. In the morning, I would walk its edge barefoot, toes sinking into the cool mud. The scent of wet earth and algae clung to the air, rich, green, and alive. Sometimes mist curled low along the surface like smoke from a sleeping fire, softening the world. It made everything seem slower, like time itself was stirring gently awake. We fished with care. At first, only with hands and sharpened sticks, standing still as stone until the water forgot we were there. Then we began to craft spears with pronged tips, small nets twisted from fibers of willow bark and grasses. We learned to fashion fish traps, placing them in the shallows where the current narrowed, guiding the fish into woven cages they could not escape. When I pulled my first catch from the river, a silver-scaled perch still quivering with the pulse of life, I felt both triumph and tenderness. I whispered thanks as I laid it gently in the basket at my side. It was never just about taking. It was about balance, about understanding that the gift was not ours by right, but by relationship. The children were the quickest learners. They would race along the bank, their laughter skipping over the water like pebbles. They showed us which bait drew the fattest fish, which pools held hidden treasures. Their fingers were quick with hooks, their eyes sharp. They made fishing a game, a song, a dance of joy. Sometimes, in the hush of afternoon, I would sit at the edge and let my legs dangle into the water. Tiny fish nibbled at my skin, and the sunlight turned the ripples into gold. I would close my eyes then, and listen. The water told stories older than any of us, stories of rain that fell before memory, of stones smoothed over centuries, of life that had swum here long before we had come to stay. We used what we gathered with reverence. The meat we roasted over open flame, its scent mingling with wood smoke and herbs. The bones we carved into needles or beads. Even the skins found purpose, stripped and dried for thread or wrapped around small bundles of herbs. Nothing was wasted, not in our way of life. And it was not only fish the water gave us. There were mussels, their hard shells hiding soft nourishment. There were birds nesting in the reeds, frogs whose songs marked the hours of dusk. We found plants along the banks, wild celery, watercress, mint, that added flavor and healing to our meals. At night, the river held the moon like a secret. Its surface became a mirror, reflecting the stars and our firelight. We would sit in a circle near the bank, bellies full and fingers still smelling of fish and smoke. The elders would speak, their voices low and rhythmic, like the lapping of water against the shore. Stories of spirits in the deep, of ancestors who had followed other rivers long ago. The children listened wide-eyed, and I felt a quiet warmth at the center of it all. The river was no longer just part of the land, it had become part of us. Its rhythm shaped our days, its gifts sustained our bodies, its song lulled us to sleep. We no longer feared hunger as we once had. We had learned to live with the water, not beside it. And so, we stayed. Not just because we could survive here, but because, in the shimmering dance of fish, In the mist that curled at dawn, in the taste of fresh water on our tongues, we had found something deeper. A belonging. A peace. Chapter 4, The Taming of the Wild. There was a soft magic in the mornings, when the world stretched slowly awake, bathed in pale, golden light. The fire had burned low overnight, its embers still glowing faintly under the thin layer of ash. The air carried a bite to it, fresh and crisp, like the first breath of spring. But it was not the wind or the birds or even the river that held my attention now. It was something else, something new, something I could not quite name. At first, it had been the wild creatures who wandered close to us. Foxes that slipped like shadows through the underbrush, their coats sleek and bright. Ravens that circled overhead, their black wings gleaming in the sun. But the wolves, they were different. Their eyes held something ancient, a knowing. They watched us from the edges of the camp, silent and still, their noses twitching at the scent of meat or the smoke of our fire. There had been moments when I had caught their gaze, sharp, clear, and full of intelligence, moments when I wondered if they too felt the pull of the earth beneath them, if they too had begun to sense the change in the rhythm of the world. But we did not approach them then. We let them circle, let them observe, as we too learned to observe them. It was not until we began to leave scraps near the fire that things changed. We were not yet thinking of taming them. We were simply learning to live in harmony with what the land offered. The wolves came closer, creeping toward the warmth of the fire, their bodies low, their movements hesitant, like a dream unfolding in the quiet of dawn. One evening, I noticed a small wolf pup watching me from the edge of the camp. Its eyes were soft with curiosity, but there was a thread of caution running through its stance, its tail held low. I did not move, did not speak. I simply waited, as still as the earth itself. Slowly, the pup ventured closer, drawn by the scent of the meat roasting on the fire. It was not hunger that guided it, but something else, an instinct, perhaps, or a desire to understand. The others noticed too, of course. They gathered in a circle, their voices hushed, as the pup took a tentative step closer, then another. It nuzzled the ground, inhaling deeply. For a moment, it seemed as though the world held its breath. And then it happened, the first touch. A small hand, young but steady, reached out and stroked the pup's coat. At first, it flinched, its body rigid with surprise, but then, as though tasting the touch, it relaxed. And the silence that followed was thick, full of meaning. The air felt warmer somehow, as if the world itself had shifted, just slightly, and everything that had once been wild was now something we could understand. In the weeks that followed, the wolf became part of our circle. It was not tamed, not in the way we had once tamed the land, but it had come to us in a quiet agreement. It was no longer a creature of the forest, entirely separate from us, it had become a companion, a guardian, a partner in the unfolding story of our lives. We fed it, and it shared its strength with us, guarding our camp at night and warning us of any predators that might come too close. I watched the change in the others too. The children, who had once feared the wolves, now played with them in the morning light, running and laughing as the pups tumbled over one another in the soft grass. And even the elders, whose wisdom was deep and slow like the earth, began to see the bond between us. We had not only learned to work with the land, with the water, with the fire, we had begun to understand the animals around us, to see them as part of the web of life, as companions rather than distant strangers. In their eyes, I saw the same thing I had seen in the river, in the earth, in the trees. We were all part of something greater, something that connected us all in ways we could not always explain but could always feel. I remember the first winter we spent with them, the wolves curled by the fire, their breath warm and steady. The world outside was cold, but within our shelter, we were surrounded by warmth, not just from the fire, but from the presence of each other. The wolves had become part of our family, as had the land, the river, the sky. We had become part of the land too, no longer wanderers but stayers, no longer separate, but woven into the fabric of the earth itself. And as I sat beside the fire, watching the flames dance against the dark sky, I knew that we had crossed a threshold. that we had begun to weave ourselves into the tapestry of life in a new way. No longer just creatures of the wild, we had become something more, a people, a community, bound not only by the land but by the gentle, living bond between us and the animals we had come to share our lives with.